Hello, and welcome to another episode of Skills Without Borders podcast, where we are dedicated to sharing skills needed to break career barriers for health, STEM, and public health professionals worldwide. Hello, I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Clark, and we have our guest today tuning in all the way from Melbourne, Australia, Serena Low. Serena Low typically helps the quiet achiever grow. She's coined this phrase as the quiet warriors. She allows them to be their self and be more visible as an introvert. So, Serena, thank you. It's fantastic to have you on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for having me here.
Not a problem. So, Serena, the reason I tapped you is because of your specialty working specifically with introverts and that personality type. I'll be honest, I've always been told I have a gift of gab, so I don't think that I have a problem with, speaking up and speaking out. But I do notice, and articles have shown, that about 35 to 50% of STEM professionals are introverts. Typically, they gravitate to these positions in STEM because it gives them more independent work. They love to problem solve, things of that nature. But sometimes, even with that introvert personality, they haven't mastered the skills to take them to the next level and be as visible as possible. So, Serena, I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to focus on helping introverts amplify their presence?
Well, I didn't start off focusing on introverts per se, but I have been an introvert all my life, and I've always envied anyone with a gift of the gab. For those of my friends who are super outgoing and extroverted, confident, gregarious, I was like, how do you do that? But then there came a period in my business where I decided I'm going to spend a year attending networking events because that was the marketing advice at the time, that you have to go out and get to know people. And I thought, well, this is an area which really makes me tremble, but I'm going to do it and find out what it's all about. And so I spent a year doing that, going here, going there, all over Melbourne, doing all these. And then I noticed something, and that was that a lot of networking events for business and professional purposes run in a very specific way. And that way is not necessarily attuned to how the introvert functions. And introverts, as well as highly sensitive people, we've got certain preferences for communication and for receiving information and for being stimulated. And I found those environments just not suitable. So I started looking around for alternatives. And because I couldn't find any alternatives, I started curating and creating my own spaces where introverts could feel safe and welcome and feel like they actually belong in this place. And so that's how I got started.
That's fantastic. And something that really stuck out to me is that you curated your own space. I love how you preface that because you're right. We think that we typically kind of have to attend that huge networking event to really put ourselves out there, but that's not always in a conducive environment for an introvert. So how was some ways that you strategically curated your own space and still been able to network and build new relationships?
So, one of the things I notice is that a lot of introverts don't like to be overstimulated. There is what we call a social battery. So when I go to events, when I host my own events, I always tell people I've got a 2 hour social battery. And that means after 2 hours, I'm not guaranteed that I'm going to keep smiling and I'm going to keep, making polite conversation because it's a drain on me physically. And so that gives other people permission to stand up and say at the 90-minute mark, for instance, um, I've had a really great time, but I've got to go now. And just that simple statement is so freeing because it gives them permission. They take back the autonomy, the agency of saying, I've had enough. I'm going to exit politely. and I don't need to make any long explanations or apologize for leaving. And that's a lot of power for an introvert who normally feels, oh, I have to please, I have to fit in, I have to do everything I can to belong to this space. And that may include staying all the way to the end of a very long event and then being completely exhausted.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's very smart. Just giving yourself one simple sentence, just to segue out so you can revitalize yourself, re-stimulate yourself, and keep yourself comfortable. So I love that approach that you take with networking. Serena, as you know, is value in networking, right? We get to show our gifts, we get to showcase our talents. So, as an introvert, even though you know your battery, you know the timeline on how that looks for you when it comes to the social setting, in that timeline, how can you be intentional of still being as authentic and still showcasing your value without seeming inauthentic in a networking space?
I think when we say inauthentic, we typically think of pretending to be something we're not. There's a lot of
Right.
advice out there about faking it till you make it, which I disagree with because we have to be true to ourselves. Otherwise, there is going to be that internal resistance that comes up in your body and shows up in your energy, and people can pick it up even if they don't know, they don't have the words for it, they don't know exactly what it is, but something about us is off when we are trying to be something other than who we are. So I prefer to tell introverts and to tell myself before I go to any event, actually the work is done before you step into the room. And that is on a daily basis, on a regular basis, to start looking for evidence of all your strengths and really being proud of those strengths, really acknowledging, recognizing all the areas where you do things effortlessly, you do things well, where people say, how do you do that? I wish I were more like you. Really noting, instead of glossing over those things, actually note those things. I call it, someone calls it a smile file, and I love that because it rhymes. And that is you compile, you document everything anyone has ever said to you about a time when you did things well, or you spoke well, or you wrote beautifully, you have a way with words, you have a gift for listening and helping people feel safe. All that evidence, put it in one place and keep looking at it until you've embodied it. It's become part of you. And then when you walk into that room, you're not the same person. You're not pretending, you're not trying too hard. You already know you are someone of substance.
That's really good, and that's a great segue. When I hear you talk about that, it's essentially your mindset, right? Getting your head in the game before you go into these settings. So, what role does mindset play in stepping into not only networking settings, but as I said, a lot of introverts find themselves, in a lot of specifically in STEM positions, they're great problem solvers because typically they're deep thinkers, they're good in their observation setting, right? But they really want to go to the next level and, let's say, leadership or branding themselves, putting themselves on camera. What type of mindset or even skills would you share with introverts on how to make themselves more visible in those leadership or personal branding roles?
So let's start with the mindset part of it. I love what Dr. Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset. And that's the idea that you can learn anything if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to learn from others, you're willing to take time to let it happen. And that, again, is back to agency and autonomy. That means it's not because I'm born this way or not born this way. It's because I actually took the time to learn and I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to go through that very non-linear process where I stumble, I make mistakes, I fail, and then I, notice the feedback, I adjust my course and I keep going. And eventually I will get to a place of competence. So mindset is also about I believe that I'm competent. Therefore, I act in a way that's consistent with that competence. But if I start off thinking, oh, I'm not as good as other people, I wish I were more vocal, I wish I were more eloquent, I wish I could speak on the fly like people do, then we're already starting from a different energy point. We're starting from a point of, I'm not good enough. And if we walk into a place feeling I'm not good enough, other people are going to pick it up as well. And it changes the dynamics of how we relate to other people because already straight off, we're not equals. And that's because we unconsciously put ourselves at a lower level and put other people on a higher level. So I think mindset is everything, especially for introverts.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing, because I've often read before, 80% of the way we communicate is body language, right? So you're saying that, whatever you think about comes about. So if you're thinking I'm not good enough and you have that kind of low confidence there, before you even open your mouth to speak, people can assess that body language. And I think there's about 7 to 8 seconds it takes for people to kind of formulate a opinion or idea about you. So you want to be listening to you and the skills that you're sharing with us for introverts. You want to be very intentional of what you're thinking about, the self-talk that you're, employing to yourself. So that's fantastic. So I can see how whenever we're around leaders, they seem so confident. They take up a lot of space in the room. And although we admire people that exudes that type of body language and confidence, like you said, with the introvert personality, they may have to take different practical strategies and skills so they can show up just as confident. So I wanted to ask you, when we talk about practical skills, what do you recommend for introverts to confidently speak up in meetings? I know sometimes, like I said, I'm lucky. I haven't had that problem. Sometimes I speak too much in meetings, but what do you really recommend for you to advocate for yourself in meetings and presentations so you won't get lost in the crowd or just as another worker, in a particular department? So do you have any strategies that introverts use on how to be more vocal in a group setting?
So vocal for an introvert doesn't have to mean loud. It means the timing of it. And the problem sometimes is that with introverts, we overthink a lot. We're trying to time our entry perfectly. We're looking for the right moment to insert ourselves. Now, other people may not have that kind of issue. They just go ahead and speak anyway. So with introverts, I would recommend that you be the second or the third person to speak up, maybe not the first, because that's too much pressure on you unless you're the one leading tasks to speak to say something on the day. But look for an opportunity to be the next person to speak up and have something ready to say. And the introvert's strength is attention to detail and listening. So we're very, very observant, and use that to recap something that someone just said and then to add your own perspective, because when meetings go on too long, a lot of people drift and lose attention. So, when you have that ability to bring people back on track by recapping what someone else just said, it shows, it helps, it's a service to others, but it also shows you are listening, you are paying attention. And then you add your own opinion, your own perspective, your own, unique take on things, because you have a way of articulating that is different from everybody else. And the introvert needs to lean more into that and really let their voice be heard. And usually what happens with introverts when they actually speak up, people are like a little bit stunned after because they seldom speak up. But when they do, it's very deep, it's very wise. It's like, oh, I've never heard it that way before, or how come no one thought of this before? It's very wise, but we hold back so much because we think it's not good enough, or, I need to be charismatic in order to speak up, or I need to be at the front of the room. And you don't always have to be. Sometimes by inserting yourself strategically from the side, you can actually make a just as big an impact. So, don't discount the value of your voice.
Okay, I love your approach. Don't think about what you do not have. Think about your strengths and what do you have and how can you leverage that, to be visible, to showcase your skills and your talents, whatever that may be. So you're saying that introverts, they actually have a strength as far as being a deep listener, an active listener, right? You have the passive listener and the active listener. So that's a skill that they can identify with, right? That comes naturally to them and they can leverage that to, have more thought provoking feedback when it comes to conversation. And that's a great point. You know, Serena, we have a online course platform where we offer skills from professionals around the world. And we specifically at Upskill have a personal branding course that we offer so people can showcase their talents and their expertise, you know, not just inside your organization, but outside your organization. I like to think of the digital platform that we all work and grow and thrive on is your new digital handshake. So I want to ask you this. In today's digital world, personal branding is essential, as we know. So how can introverts leverage online platforms like LinkedIn or so forth to build their presence effectively?
LinkedIn is perfect for introverts because it's all about the quality of your writing, the kind of stories you tell. And I've noticed this trend. A lot of people are telling stories and getting great reception. Now, I'm not saying that, those metrics necessarily tell you how effective you are if you are, let's say, a professional or a business owner. There's not necessarily a direct correlation between how many followers you have, how many reactions you're getting, and whether they lead to anything at all concrete. But if you want to be noticed, you have to start telling your stories. You have to start using your gift with words, which is something introverts typically have. They love writing, right? We love putting our head down, creating the content, going into that very deep space of knowledge and wisdom and research and study, putting it all together, curating it, adding our own unique flavor to it, and then putting it out into the world. The putting out into the world is the part that's tricky, because what happens with the introvert is we overthink, we think it's not good enough yet, or it's too maybe it's too much, or it's not enough, or something. And some reason we just delete that draft. I say send it out anyway, because you don't know. What we're trying to do is mind read what other people are going to, how they're going to react to our piece. And really, I mean, there's no way we can possibly mind read every single person. We don't even know if it shows up on their feed. And if it does show up on their feed, whether they actually see it, because we're all busy scrolling down, right? And we miss a lot of good information. But when it does land with the right person, we want that person to feel energized. We want that first person to feel there is hope. We want that person to feel, I've been there too. You're not alone. We want that person to feel encouraged that there is a way out. Somebody else has been through this. So every story has a value. And LinkedIn is one of the best places for the introvert to show up on, because it doesn't require you to speak unless you want to do a video. You can just write, create content, put it out there, connect with people, and not only putting out your own content, but also commenting on other people's posts, which I'm sure is how we got to know each other in the first place. Which is that, when you see someone's post and it resonates with you, or it inspires you in some way, or it's like, wow, I never thought of it that way before, you can comment. And because as content creators, we love it when other people comment on our posts. So let's, reciprocate, do that as well. Life is a flow, right? A cycle. And that keeps that connection going. It becomes something real. It's not just some digital words, putting it out there. I'm doing my personal branding. It becomes a connection between two real people, two human beings. And that's powerful, because you just don't know. It's magical where it could lead to.
Yeah. And I love to say you never know who's watching. Never get hung up on the likes or the clicks, because some people, I know on my platforms, some people reach out to me that has never liked the video on my platform rather, but you never know who's watching. And that's very interesting, is that you're pointing out that a lot of times introverts get caught up in their thoughts because you guys are such deep thinkers, but eventually you have to know when to kind of shut that off and just be more action based. Like, you know what? The post may not be perfect, the blog may not be perfect, but I'm going to show up anyway. So that's a real good commitment and a challenge, right? That's where we grow outside of our comfort zone. That's where really all the magic happens, whether you're introvert or extrovert alike. And you're right, I did reach out to you because, like I said, my background is in lab, a lot of scientific research. And a lot of times when I was navigating my career, working in that more research setting, I worked with a lot of introverts. I was chatting everybody up in the lab, and you can literally see their skin crawling But over time, I managed to navigate from corporate America and now into a business owner. And those same scientists sometimes reach out to me and say, how did you do that? So for introverts looking to advance in their careers or businesses, what is one piece of advice that you'd give them to start taking actionable steps, getting out of their head and taking actionable steps?
I think I want to approach it from two perspectives. One is the idea that we don't have to actually get out of our head. I think that the head, or rather the comfort zone for the introvert, is a very safe space. A lot of this has to do with safety and how we perceive safety. So I like to think of it as expanding the comfort zone. Give yourself a little more room to play in. Give yourself a little more room to freely express yourself in. Instead of feeling, oh, if I put my foot out of this line, I'm going to be in so much trouble. So I have to brace myself and I have to be ready because it's dangerous out there. I think when we start with that kind of a mindset, we automatically shrink it back into ourselves. So I like to encourage people to think of it as expanding your comfort zone. Each year, you're going to nudge it a little further, grow into that kind of person that can say, oh, actually, I'm going to redraw the lines here. I think I need more space. I need to, show up differently. And the other thing is, I love the idea of the atomic habit, 1% mindset, James Clear. The idea is to be 1% better every day. That's my challenge to myself, my invitation to myself. So whatever I'm doing, I'm not looking at what other people are doing because that's really distracting and takes up a lot of my energy. I'm looking at, am I better today than I was yesterday, than I was last week, than I was this time last year, 10 years ago? And what you notice is that when you focus on just that 1% every day, whatever that looks like, over time, it's going to compound, just like compound interest. It's going to add up. Every little thing matters. People are constantly looking for the one thing, the one solution, the one magic fix that's going to change everything. And that's not how it works. It's actually an accumulation of all the little things you do differently each day. So notice where your energy is going. Notice where you stop yourself. Notice where you hold back and think, oh, I can't do this. It's too hard. Or it's too scary. I can't possibly say yes to this invitation to speak in public, for instance. And then you change your response to that one time and notice what happens, like an experiment that you do, in the lab. And notice what changes. And then when you notice what changes, you put yourself automatically on a different trajectory. Just by inserting, by noticing, by tweaking your course, your outcome is going to be different. So you keep doing that. So it's about showing up consistently. Of course, we're going to have days where we don't feel like doing anything. But aside from that, we bring ourselves back on track. We keep going with that 1%. The Japanese call it kaizen, which is like continuous improvement. And I love that idea because it's a work in progress. It's a life work. This idea of, how can I be better? How can I reach my potential? And it's made up of all that 1% action you take every day.
That's fantastic. 1% at a time. Thank you so much for that insight. It kind of makes it more digestible to us as we're trying to, be more action based, show up more visibly authentic in the spaces that we dream and desire to go in our careers. So this was very informative. So I want to segue into this real quick before we close out. Serena, you have a podcast that you've been running for several years now. Your podcast is The Quiet Warrior, and it provides a lot of insight for introverts navigating success. So what has been some of your biggest takeaways from hosting your podcast?
I would say the biggest takeaway is podcasting is perfect for introverts as well because we don't have to shout. We just need a microphone and then we can amplify the message. And once you've overcome that little hurdle of, oh, so this is how my voice sounds. Oh, I'm not sure I like the sound of my voice. But beyond that, it's actually very liberating to to put your voice out into the world. It's just you talking into space or talking to one person. It's extremely comfortable and it's a great way to amplify a quiet voice. And the other thing I've learned is it makes you show up consistently because there's a whole process. As you know, there's so much involved in running a podcast and maintaining a podcast. You're not just, creating content, you're looking for guest speakers, you're creating your show notes, you're working on your trailers and your teasers and how to promote it and get it in front of more people. All that requires you to show up. Now, when the way you show up in anything is the way you show up in everything. So that, that consistency flows over into other areas of your life because you have that structure with the podcast. I have to do this amount of stuff today in order to meet certain milestones for yourself, and it becomes a good practice. It becomes a habit that you embody, simply showing up because someone is waiting to hear your next episode and someone needs your wisdom. And so because of that sense of moral obligation, you keep showing up for as long as you can. And that basically, I think, is the, I guess, if I have
Yeah.
to bring it down to one line, it's really about showing up. Whether you're a quiet person or you have the gift of the gap, it's how you're sharing yourself with the world every day in service of something greater.
That's fantastic. It's power in showing up. I love that perspective and that viewpoint. You will be surprised who's looking forward to hear your wisdom, even if we don't think it's wisdom, sharing your point of view to expand someone else's perspectives or knowledge base in different things. So I love what you said. Preparing for a podcast, it's a lot of moving parts in place, and those are new skills that you develop along the way as well, just putting a podcast in place. So I am so happy to bring you on all the way from Melbourne, Australia, where you are able to grace our community, our global audience, where we are constantly learning and looking to upskill ourselves. So Serena, I just want to graciously really thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule for coming on the Skills Without Borders podcast. Like I said, is there any other platforms that if we have introverts and they say, you know what, I want to hear more of what Serena has to say, how can other audience members or people get in contact with you?
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn,
Okay.
so people can find me there. And yeah, let's connect and have that conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. It was such a pleasure to get a little bit more insight on the world of the introvert and really helping them, become more visible and so they can soar to new heights. Thank you so much for your time today, and it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Bye bye.